cada vez que le hacemos una pregunta a ChatGPT, algo en la selva tropical muere.
Every time you have a conversation with ChatGPT, throw a bottle of water in the trash.
Hola, Vijay. Hi, Vijay. ¿Cómo estás?
I'm doing well. Muy bien. Gracias.
¿Cómo te trata Argentina? Porque llegaste hace 24 horas, menos, pocas horas.
It's been about 6 hours, actually. So yeah, I'm still a little bit jet lagged.
Yes, bastante diríamos. ¿Mucho o poco? Jet lag, ¿cómo te llevas con el jet lag cuando haces muchos viajes?
I'm very lucky that I can sort of just power through, but I do need to have one good night of rest in between that really helps with get over jet lag and just having good food along the way.
O sea, es lo que no estás teniendo ahora.
Exactly. That's why I'm holding off until I can do a proper dinner and then get to bed soon.
Te bajaste de un avión, o sea, te subiste en Boston, te bajaste en Argentina, fuiste a la UBA y ahora estás al lado de ET. O sea, ¿vos pensabas que iba a ser así tan distópico todo este viaje a Argentina?
No, I did not. Thank you for warning me before I got here about this. I might have rethought whether I should come. I'm just kidding. No, it's been just, eye-opening to talk to people with different backgrounds who are clearly trying to do good work, incorporating artificial intelligence or Inteligencia Artificial in the work that they're doing. So it's just, exciting to be a part of this conversation. And your hospitality has been amazing.
Bueno, es literalmente mi casa, así que bienvenido a casa.
Yeah, what else can I say when I'm sitting in your home?
Vijay, mira, primero vamos a empezar este podcast que va a ser muy relajado. Yo quiero que fluya a partir de todo lo que vos sabés. Vos naciste en uno de los países más poblados del mundo. Y después te fuiste a Estados Unidos y en Estados Unidos desarrollaste una carrera profesional admirable. Pero quería, antes de empezar, meterte en nuestra cultura. Porque la cultura de cada país un poco refleja la forma en la que uno piensa el mundo. Y en Argentina, una forma, no solo en Argentina, en Paraguay, en Uruguay y en algunos lugares de Brasil, este mate, que si ves aquí tiene future past and the words like aceleración, obsolescencia y propósito. Este mate es como una forma de homenajear a alguien, de ser hospitalario, como de entrar en confianza y decir, Vijay, eres parte de nuestra familia. Entonces, voy a hacer algo que he hecho en muchos países, que es servir un mate. Y las personas que observan esto, lo voy a recrear. Mira, yo primero voy a servir agua. Después voy a hacer algo que tu cara probablemente exprese tus sentimientos. Lo voy a tomar yo primero. Esto, cuando lo hice en muchos países, ya me empiezan a mirar como diciendo, vos no me vas a dar esto mientras lo acabas de tomar, que es lo que me suele decir las personas. Y sí, es lo que voy a hacer. Entonces, el mate es una de las pocas bebidas en el mundo que se comparte solamente este mismo recipiente. No es que cada uno tiene un vaso, tenemos que compartirlo. Entonces, ahora te voy a hacer probar un mate. Y yo necesito que me digas, porque esto es lo que te va a meter en nuestra cultura, necesito que me digas qué te parece.
Ok.
Te pido disculpas por esta experiencia. Lo único que tienes que hacer es absorber el líquido que está ahí adentro.
Okay. All right. No, it's interesting you mentioned this because in India, tea is a very popular part of the culture there as well. And it's not uncommon to share a cup of tea with someone, sometimes to save money, sometimes also because it's an act of bonding. So yeah, I'll be happy to try it. I've heard a lot about mate before. This is honestly the first time I'm ever trying this in my life. So this will be the unfiltered reaction coming up.
A ver, si te parece, me da un poquito de ansiedad esto. A ver, what do you think?
Well, I like it. Yeah, it's a little bit green tea, a little bit of sweetness to it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really tasty.
Les aclaro a las personas que están mirando el podcast, cuando piensen que es dulce, mucha gente en Argentina se va a enojar, porque obviamente tomar el mate en Argentina con algo de endulzante es como que yo te diga que al té le vamos a poner café. Es como algo que desafía a las personas que son culturalmente aferradas a este... Bueno, habiendo superado esta prueba, bienvenido a Argentina. Ahora sí podríamos decir, una vez que tomaste mate, ya podemos decir que ya estamos en ambiente.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me join in on that cultural activity. I actually really like the taste. I'm going to have to take a little bit back. It's got this earthy aftertaste, which is quite delicious.
Creo que no sé si lo estás haciendo para tratar de ser hospitalario. Creo que la primera persona que conozco que me dice que le gustó, porque en general es una bebida que para los que no están familiarizados, sienten que está muy lejos del café y del té. Sienten que es muy fea, o sea, más, no sé cómo decirla, awful. Sí, awful es la palabra. Do you want to try another?
I will, yeah. I actually think that I've heard this, and this is definitely out of my scientific background, but if you drink bitter things, and you like bitter things like black coffee, Americano, espresso, beer, that you have, that there's like a genetic predisposition towards liking these things. So you might find people who drink black coffee and beer also enjoy this type of beverage. I don't know if there's any research on that yet.
A ver, entonces, vamos una vez más.
Yeah, I like it.
Bueno,
it's got a familiar flavor. I don't know what to put it on it, but it's quite interesting. It's got a little bit of green tea,
yes,
a little bit of earthiness. So yeah.
Casi todas las personas lo llevan al té verde. La mayoría de personas lo lleva a un tipo de té verde.
Yeah, but it's got a little aftertaste to it that's different.
It's like more, es como más amargo.
Yeah.
Es como más...
I like it. Very good. Yeah.
Gracias.
I also like the cup.
Podríamos decir que literalmente te metiste en el podcast, porque al meterte en esta bebida ya te metiste en el podcast, literalmente.
All right, okay.
Bueno, Vijay, me voy del mate, lo dejo por aquí, yo seguramente seguiré tomando. Si vos quieres tomar, simplemente me dices, dame un mate.
Okay.
Y yo te doy un mate.
Claro.
Vijay, MIT. Para muchos latinos, el MIT es una mezcla de titulares de diario. El MIT descubrió, el MIT hizo, el MIT... Es la mejor universidad del mundo, según muchísimos rankings. Por ejemplo, el ranking QS siempre viene siendo primera desde hace, que yo tenga uso de razón, 15 años, at least. Pero la gente quizás no toma dimensión de qué significa MIT. Si vos tuvieses que contarle a la gente argentina o a un latino, ¿cuál es la identidad de MIT? O sea, ¿qué es lo que pasa ahí adentro de MIT que hace que MIT sea tan popular en el mundo?
Yeah, so MIT has a long history as a research university. It actually started up as more of an agricultural and, engineering institution. It was actually looked down upon by some of the colleges around, some of the Ivy League schools like Harvard, which is, very close by. You've been to MIT, you've been to Harvard, you know how close they are. I think what's really made MIT popular is this, what we call menus imanus, which means mind and hand. So while most universities are focused on the mind portion of it, which is the academic education and curriculum, MIT has always had a strong history in the manus part, from Latin, the practical application of these skills. And that's why when you look at, how many companies have been founded by MIT people, either MIT alumni or MIT faculty or researchers, that number is staggering, right? It's I forget the exact statistic, but they claim that the number of if all the MIT alumni companies were counted as a nation, the GDP of that nation would make it one of the 10th largest countries in the world. Because it's that little bit of, you need a little bit of both, right? And I think AI in particular we're seeing that where they're theoretical contributions, but very quickly they're turning into these practical applications, and he or she or they who can move between those two worlds quickly, they do really well. And I think that's what made MIT distinguish itself from maybe many other universities.
Y en Latinoamérica, por lo poco que conoces, o en India, para hacer una analogía también o una comparación con países que quizás no tienen ese nivel de desarrollo. ¿Vos ves una cultura similar a la del MIT o te parece que estamos muy lejos para llegar a algo similar a MIT?
So I'm certainly not as familiar with the culture out here, just mainly through friends and all, but certainly far from really understanding deeply what the culture is. But I think coming from India, I think, part of what makes MIT is also the resources that it has available. It has also been the melting pot across the world, right? Bringing the brightest talent from everywhere in the world. And, maybe I could argue Stanford or Berkeley, but there's a very small number of universities, some of which are in the United States, some of which are in the European Union, that really have been good at, I think there's just so much in diversity of thought that comes in. And, you're getting incredibly smart people that know how to build and know how to make things. And that is really where you see a lot of this innovations coming up, whether it's the radar or some of the large language models, right, in the more modern age, or, autonomous vehicles. So many technologies have come out of these small number of universities, because this is a group of people that's, obviously incredibly talented, but you'll find talented people everywhere. But this is an ambitious, aggressive group of people that will not take no for an answer and will keep doing it until they succeed or it is impossible to go any further. And I think that culture, it exists everywhere. I think MIT allows it to really shine, right? In the conversation we were having before, I think every organization, every individual wants to do well, but as more barriers or impediments are put in their way, some people might give up. And, I think where MIT has been really good is do it. Right? And, if you need more resources, we'll give you more resources, but keep going, right? We try not to get in the way.
Como podés ver, acá tenemos a Master Yoda, E.T., Iron Man, Darth Vader, Grogu, o sea, todos los personajes, pero falta el DeLorean de Back to the Future.
Uh-huh.
Para las personas que nacieron después de los 90, tienen que ir a YouTube para entender de qué hablo. Pero obviamente el DeLorean como objeto icónico de cómo manipular el pasado y el futuro, si vos tuvieses que subirte a un DeLorean, tenés que subirte a ese auto e ir para atrás a un momento de tu vida, tipo un key point, un punto de inflexión. ¿Qué es lo que te llevó a la IA? ¿Qué es lo que te llevó a ser el investigador que sos y a cofundar una empresa que se dedica a la IA? ¿Dónde está ese momento? ¿Lo encontrás? ¿Es un momento o es una acumulación de momentos?
Yeah, no, certainly I think it's an accumulation of moments, or being able to bring many different things together. I always tell people, especially, now that I certainly never considered myself an AI person. In fact, during my undergraduate degree, I worked in power electronics. I was building little transformers for small processors and computers, right? Being able to avoid AC and DC transformations. Grad school, by some chance, I got into supercomputing and working in, and thanks to my advisor, really, but, ended up going in there and then working in a problem of image processing. And that led nowhere. I kept, tried to keep beating it up, and really I couldn't make any results. And by some luck, right, chance, ended up working with autonomous vehicles and designing some of the algorithms for driverless cars early on. This is well before we had...
¿En qué año? In what year?
This is in 2012, okay. 2010 to 2013.
Recién las redes neuronales, ahí había un momento clave con Hinton y Ila en 2012 tratando de mejorar las redes neuronales con las técnicas backpropagation.
Exactly. So my research often gets the I get the great pleasure of being seen as in prior work before neural networks came about. So my work was on hidden Markov models and Gaussian mixture models, which still are valid, but neural networks have clearly taken over that. And so that sort of got me working into machine learning. And then after that, it's just been, I've always been interested in large-scale computing, and it turns out that the biggest problems on Earth happen to be focused on, we called it big data. I always like to joke with people, right? I mean, we did big data, and so we did all of these experiments bringing the data together. The hell do you think you're going to do with all that data? And that's what's really led to machine learning and AI, where you actually go get some insight and work on this data to get some new results. And so ended up there, and even just ending up in energy and understanding that has just been through a series of chances, conversations with friends, a lot of thinking over COVID, podcasts like this, right, that open your mind up and make you think about different things. That's been, for me at least, so it's been complete chance. I love it. I'm not a planned person. I've never planned anything out in my life, so it works.
O sea, te lo encontraste. Simplemente te lo encontraste. Se te cruzó mientras vos desarrollabas tu vida profesional.
That's right. In fact, this particular research in energy efficiency came from an argument I was having with a friend and colleague at MIT who is a big gamer. And he bought one of these ridiculous computing rigs, right? This rig beast. He needed to run water cooling. And so this is COVID. We had nothing but to do, but so I was making fun of him. I was like, really? You need to go and get such a ridiculous gaming rig? And, we started to have a conversation, and, like any good MIT person, he came back the next day with a plot that showed what the frames per second is for the video game versus what power level he needed to operate the GPUs. And from then, we've just sort of kept building on such techniques because we realized that you don't need 120 frames per second. The average person can look at 100 frames per second or maybe 80 frames per second and still have a very good gaming session. And that required only 50% or 60% of the total power. And he didn't need the water cooling. And so that sort of kicked off a lot of this.
Vijay, creo que ahí diste en algo que me parece súper importante, que en la academia se suele subestimar. En general, cuando se innova, y me acuerdo en una serie de Netflix que una investigadora del MIT se ponía a estudiar cómics porque estudiando cómics hacía un link entre lo que podía descubrir. Y vos acabas de dar un ejemplo. ¿Por qué te parece que está tan subestimado el hecho de ir a otros lugares, a otros mundos, y ahí aprender algo nuevo que no tiene nada que ver con tu industria, como puede ser estar mirando Star Wars y que se te ocurra un concepto? ¿Por qué te parece que está tan subestimado ese cruce, ese crossover entre cosas que son muy diferentes a lo que uno hace, pero que podrían darnos una idea clave para avanzar?
No, this is something you don't know where innovation is going to come from. I've had, some of the smartest people I've worked with have been not engineers, not scientists by the classical definition. They're certainly scientists in the real definition, but by degrees or universities, they're not necessarily fitting into your traditional definition. It's about curiosity and being able to look for that. And I do think that the real strengths come from interdisciplinary, coming back to MIT, what MIT also does really well is bringing together different disciplines. We have departments and we have labs, and the labs are this group of people that are from interdisciplinary. So you'll be working on your team. We've had economists, computer scientists, physicists, engineers, English majors, right? All working together, each bringing their own unique aspect to the problem. And it's that really gets you, right? When you just put 10 engineers together, we tend to solve problems that we find interesting, but not necessarily someone else. But when you bring in other people, it's sort of like you do in a company. But research, for whatever reason, has always been this like little narrow group of people. And we're very insular. We don't want new people coming in. So we put these artificial boundaries on who can and cannot join us. So I like to think of, thinking of this more like a company in the way we do it. We'll bring talent from anywhere, any part of the world, whatever language they speak, however they look, whatever they sound like. We don't care. We just want good ideas and, kind of go from there.
Vos sabés que en Argentina no puedo estar más de acuerdo en lo que acabas de decir. De hecho, el concepto que nosotros tratamos de impulsar es multidisciplinario por diseño o interdisciplinario por diseño. porque de esa manera es lo que acabas de describir. Fantástico que lo digas tú. Yo lo suelo decir mucho y a veces tenemos mucha resistencia de los que son científicos de alto nivel, que quizás piensan que solamente ellos van a poder descubrir ciertas cosas y en definitiva nadie puede solo. Uh-huh. En definitiva esto es un equipo. Y los equipos multidisciplinarios, como tú dijiste, son los que nos pueden ayudar a profundizar. Bueno, aceleración. Sí. No sé si a vos te pasa, leo muchos papers día. Estos últimos días leí los tuyos, al menos los que publicaste en 2023 y 2024. Te pido disculpas, no pude leer otros más antiguos, porque además tus papers son muy técnicos, en un área muy específica, pero me gusta leer muchos papers día por día, diariamente. En nuestros equipos, y cuando trabajamos con diferentes personas de diferentes laboratorios, hay como una sensación de sobrecarga cognitiva, por un lado, y por otro lado de imposibilidad de absorción. Es decir, es tan masivo lo que se está produciendo y de tantos lugares, con un modelo o dos saliendo por día, es decir, en new model que puede hacer, en un nuevo modelo que puede hacer, y así, que da la sensación de que la aceleración que vivimos en otros periodos no se compara en absoluto a esta. ¿Cómo ves esas dos aceleraciones? Es decir, la aceleración que viviste a fines del siglo XX y la aceleración que estás viviendo en este momento, o sea, en estos meses.
Yeah, so, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. And I think there's two ways I want to maybe talk about that. One is sort of like, I've just been learning more recently, kind of more just personal experiences and things like that. So let me just take our interactions so far. You've been speaking to me in Spanish. I've been speaking to you in English over email. We have amazing translators over here who are helping us do this. So coming back to, it takes a team, right, to put all of this together. We have some amazing people who are helping keep this conversation flowing. But even before this, you could communicate in your native language. I could communicate in my native language even before this. We were able to coordinate, make plans. And so this technology has got a lot of value. It's reduced these barriers where maybe we wouldn't have been able to interact even 5 years ago or 7 years ago. We'd have to have really a lot more difficulty in doing it. But it's become so easy for us to do this, and we can each stay doing things more comfortably. On the other side, on the technical side, I think we're maybe at this phase where, so kind of just looking at the history of even just AI and large language models. AI has been around for a long time, since the 1950s. In fact, MIT was one of the first authors of some of the papers. Those papers are the models they described there were relatively small, maybe 100 parameters or 100 numbers that described how the model functioned, to today, where some of the frontier models are trillions of parameters in size. And you kind of look at this growth for about 40 years or so, maybe 50 years of AI, these models would double. So it'd go from 100 to 200 to 400, maybe every 2 years. We're now doubling these parameters almost every 100 days. So we're going from 1 trillion to 2 trillion to 4 trillion about every 100 days. So that is a pace of innovation that is happening very quickly. So I think that's going to start slowing down over time. We're just starting to see limits. But what is not going to change, and I think where the real innovation is now going to come, is being able to apply these to different types of problems. I know we've been looking at some of the proposals that have been coming through your lab here and looking at, using that for, it's those type of novel ideas that we're going to see a lot more of, right? So people are going to take this technology so it's like the internet, right? The internet had this explosion, and then people started to really apply it for different applications, and then that's what really caused the sort of second growth. So I think we're going to see the same thing in AI. Maybe we're going to start to plateau on the models themselves. So maybe it won't be llamas popping out, every month or two, but we're going to start to see that maybe phase down or, become plateau. But then now the applications are going to become, you're going to find it everywhere.
Okay. Ray Kurzweil, sí, me imagino que lo conoces, el que era ex director de ingeniería de Google, el que escribió The Singularity is Near y varias investigaciones. En su último libro, La singularidad está aún más cerca, is near, él dice que, lo dijo en un podcast con Lex Friedman, mostró un gráfico en una escala logarítmica que la IA, esto lo dijo aproximadamente hace casi 2 años, que la IA duplicaba, cuando digo la IA, voy a ser más preciso, la capacidad de computación para ejecutar los parámetros, o sea, para ejecutar esos parámetros y la cantidad de datos que puede ejecutar, ya sea en entrenamiento y en inferencia, se duplicaba cada 5.7 meses y otras personas dicen cada 2 o 3 y vos acabás de decir 100 días. Con lo cual estamos en una escala que ni siquiera es exponencial. Habría que pensar si no es doble exponencial. Entiendo que a muchas personas que están viendo este podcast, a un humano ya le cuesta entender lo que significa la exponencialidad. Imagínate la doble exponencialidad. Entonces, entiendo que lo que acabas de decir, que esto quizás ya no sea tanto que salen modelos que ejecutan parámetros, sino es aplicaciones en el mundo real y que eso sea lo relevante y no tanto lo que puede hacer un modelo. Pero lo que me está pasando, al menos en Latinoamérica, me encantaría tu opinión, es que las personas, ya sea que entrenan modelos o las personas que son usuarios de IA, los IA by user, el concept IA by user, están en un estadio de incertidumbre. No saben si el modelo es bueno o no es bueno, si en realidad es obsoleto o no es obsoleto, si en realidad lo que es hoy va a ser obsoleto en 2 meses. Entonces, ese estado de incertidumbre generalizado, ¿cómo te parece que se puede gestionar hoy?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I have, coming from a cloud computing company, this is something our customers talk to us all the time about, and we have to be moving very quickly to make sure we're supporting the latest out there. But we have seen in experiments, right, there are a number of metrics that people use to see whether a model is good or bad. We're starting to see, with DeepSeek, some of the OpenAI models out there, that we're at least on the MMLU, which is a popular score for language understanding. We're starting to see a plateauing in terms of people getting pretty good, getting pretty high. There's a number of other tests and experiments out there that are coming up, some which are, more human intelligence focused that are out there. But I think some of this really depends on the application that you're doing. So if you're looking for something to help you write a better email, or maybe even do translation in a very general sense, I think those type of applications, you're probably, there's probably a lot of stability. There'll be some minor changes.
Okay.
But if you're looking for an image model, a video model, maybe something to help you find sites to extract natural gas, those type of models that's what I kind of come to the applications. Those are moving very quickly.
Okay.
And so it is, if it's a more general purpose one, I think we're starting to get some leveling off. But if it's something that's new, multimodal, something different, it's tough. But that's one of the challenges, right? So when we're building it's and then you have to figure out how to compute this. Like, how do you actually run these models and make them work? So it's a very big challenge, and that's why I think the adoption rates are still not as high as we think it is in the real market.
Supongamos que los modelos fundacionales basados esencialmente en transformers son IA de avanzada y la IA classic podrían ser topic model, bolsa de palabras, etcétera, bad of words, etcétera, etcétera. Sí, redes neuronales clásicas. Hace 2 días Netflix sacó un paper no científico, de divulgación, en donde estaban modificando la esencia de su algoritmo de recomendación y lo estaban basando en un modelo fundacional. Es decir, ellos tenían varios componentes, pero ahora lo están centralizando. Al menos eso es lo que dijeron en su paper. Pero esto muestra una tendencia que me gustaría tu opinión, que es la IA, Generative AI, y la IA agéntica, se está comiendo como un Pac-Man la IA clásica.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, it's really funny to see, coming back to, all of these that we have around us, right? So I kind of think of, and I think many others, not just me, kind of think of there being sort of 3 evolutions of AI. So the first evolution of AI was really based on these expert systems, and which is kind of like your...
Son los sistemas expertos.
Exactly, system expertos, yeah. Which is, someone who knows something really well sits and says, this is how... Maybe you all don't have this, but we have to file taxes in the US every year, and we have to use this complicated software. So that's an expert system, right? There is a chartered accountant who sits down and says, this is what the tax rules are, and I'm going to make a software that allows you to go through this. So they're still very popular. It requires a lot of human knowledge, but they're very fast, almost no computation. It's a rule-based system. Then as we started to get a little bit more computing in, we started to say, you know what? I don't need you to figure out every single rule. I'm going to let the machine figure out what the rules might be or what they should look like. And so that led to the second era. You can call these like...
Subsymbolic.
Symbolic, exactly. Symbolic AI, right? Which is based on, so things like the hidden Markov models, Gaussian mixture models. You have to embed some knowledge. These are like Doom, right? Like playing the game Doom or Wolf 3.
Yes, of course.
Or maybe even some of the newer games that are out there where they were learning, the characters were learning from what you were doing, and the characters themselves were behaving differently based on how you were behaving with them.
Claro.
Now the latest version, right? So you had to it put some data in there because you had to tell it, is it a Gaussian? Like what's the model look like? What's the distribution of this model look like? Is it is it two states if it's a hidden Markov model, that there's a visible layer and a non-visible layer, things like that. And now the latest version of AI, which I think Transformers is sort of the next one, where you've been able to dial even down what data you're providing it. You're telling the system, not only are you going to figure out what the rules are, you're also going to figure out what the underlying distribution is. And that's really like some of these even newer games, which is now starting to become like playing with another human being, right? Even with these older video games, right, that were maybe based on the symbolic or statistical machine learning, they still had certain patterns that they followed. And you knew if you were playing Counter-Strike against, one of these, or Quake or any of these games, you'd know where eventually they're going to pop up, right? Because there's still a pattern. The new generative systems are actually just learning from people, right? Either through reinforcement learning or, based on these transformer models, but able to really emulate human behavior, which is what makes them so popular. So they're all AI, but they're just... I like to think of however much you have three dials, right? How much knowledge are you willing to put into this? How much compute are you willing to throw at the problem? And how much data do you have that describes it? And expert systems are all where you had no data, no compute, but a lot of knowledge. The statistical machine learning in the middle was sort of like a midpoint of those. And this is basically, I'm just going to throw compute and data at it, and I want to give it no information from beforehand. Or very little, I should say.
Genial, porque me metes en un tema profundo quizás para muchas personas que quizás están viendo a Darth Vader y dijeron, bueno, paso por este podcast y se encuentran con una conversación de alto nivel sobre conceptos técnicos, pero estoy viendo, intento ver muchos podcasts de Estados Unidos en donde van declarando Sean LeCun, Hinton, entre muchos otros, en diferentes podcasts, y estoy viendo como dos visiones, una minoritaria, donde está Sean LeCun, creo yo, y otra mayoritaria.
Uh-huh.
Las voy a resumir y me encantaría tu opinión. Una mayoritaria que dice que, o al menos es lo que yo entiendo de lo que dice este coro de voces vinculados a que estamos dando los pasos correctos hacia AGI,
uh-huh,
que vamos a llegar a AGI entre, algunos dicen 1 año, otros dicen 2 años,
uh-huh,
Demi Hassabis dice entre 5 y 10, pero lo cierto es que no le ponen un límite a la lógica de predicción de tokens o de scoring de tokens. Es como si los tokens o esta lógica de ponderar tokens y modelos autorregresivos nos va a llevar ahí, de alguna manera. Pero después está Sean LeCun que dice, voy a abandonar, lo acaba de decir hace pocos días, voy a abandonar a los Transformers y me voy a dedicar a otro tipo de técnicas que se enfoquen mucho más en cómo la IA puede entender el mundo físico. Tú que trabajaste con vehículos autónomos,
uh-huh,
es crítico que la IA entienda ¿dónde estás en estas dos, si pudiésemos decir que estas son dos posiciones, ¿dónde estás vos en tu investigación o por lo que vos entendés?
So I have like a couple of viewpoints here. I do agree. I think transformers are sort of a brutish model to use, right? I mean, very cool idea, but we've scaled them into this, behemoths that it wasn't really designed to be at this sizes. And a lot of people, though, have made some pretty big investments to keep these running. So it was the low risk scale up, right? If you're a venture backed company and, like we are, and you're talking to a VC to give you money, they want low risk. They want low risk, high return as much as possible. So transformers, for the longest time, in my opinion, were that low risk version, where people said, if I went up to a VC and said, look, I'm going to build a model to do this. And if you then told them, I'm going to invent a new model completely while I'm doing that, they would have been like, no, thank you, right? Just use the damn model that you have over here and just make it work, right? And it's inefficient. I think the only advantage that transformers have had, which has been somewhat lucky, is that they're highly scalable. You can throw more computing at it and you get that much. There's this law in supercomputing known as Amdahl's law, which tells you what maximum amount of performance improvement you can get. And transformers are pretty high up there, right? So more processors, more performance.
Te hago un paréntesis. Se me ocurre la analogía de la industria automotriz, cuando los primeros vehículos gastaban mucho y no eran muy eficientes para llevarnos a ciertas distancias. Los Transformers, si pudimos hacer una analogía imperfecta, ¿qué vehículos serían? ¿Un Forte? ¿Qué vehículos podrían ser en la historia automotriz?
Yeah, so they would be like a V12.
Okay.
That's right, V8, V12, right? So you could scale these, you can make a V15 and it moves faster. But now we need to think, is there an electric version that can go just as fast and give you all the benefits? Leaving aside the other conversations, but that's what I think people are out exploring, right? And, looking at folks like Jan LeCun, obviously clearly a very smart individual. I'm glad, right? Because I think there are other techniques out there, but it's difficult, right? It's tough to, when the whole world thought the earth was flat, it was tough to say the world is round and prove it, right? So someone has to go make it and then be successful at actually making that viable product. And until that occurs, you're just going to have, because there is a working solution, right? I think we all suffer from this. I myself, inertia, right? Why fix what ain't broken, as we say in English often. And, they feel transformers, it costs a lot of money. It sucks for the environment, but it's working. You want to go reinvent this thing? I don't know if that's going to work. And if it does, I don't know where it's going to fail. So it's sort of the known devil versus the unknown, which is where we are right now. But yeah, we need someone to figure out the new, whether it's a hydrogen fuel cell car, an electric car, or what is this new engine design that we need to have that allows us to then propel into the next decade.
Esto es papel, ¿sí?
Yeah.
Es, por supuesto, a propósito. O sea, está hecho adrede para... no quiero tener ningún dispositivo tecnológico que se interponga entre nuestra conversación. Quiero hacerla más en retrospectiva. Cuando recién me decías esta comparación, y ahora vamos a ir a la energía de la IA y a cómo hacerla más sostenible, porque es tu campo o uno de tus campos de investigación más profundos. Pero yo pensaba en las personas que piensan que la IA es inteligente, que piensan que la IA razona y que piensan que la IA planifica. Entonces, comillas a todos estos conceptos. Yo no quiero entrar en una discusión, o me parece que no te quiero preguntar filosóficamente hasta qué punto la IA o no es inteligente y si es equivalente a la inteligencia humana. No quiero ir por ahí. Pero sí me parece importante esto que recién decías de si la IA está tratando de simular razonamiento. No llega por el mismo camino que un humano, o al menos que nosotros sepamos, llega por otro camino a algo que puede incluso superar a un humano. Pero el humano lo percibe como un verdadero razonamiento, porque en definitiva el humano dice, no importa cómo llegó hasta aquí, resuelve este problema. Entonces, si resuelve este problema, después dejémosle a la academia que discuta si eso es razonamiento o no es razonamiento. Ahora, esta lógica, ¿no te parece que puede entrañar un riesgo para la percepción de las personas en relación a la tecnología que tienen enfrente? ¿No habría que poner más énfasis en el hecho de que es una simulación de razonamiento, o te parece que eso no es una discusión?
Yeah, I mean, I think that these are just systems that are learning patterns, right? What is generative AI? It's nothing but a subfield within AI that's just really good at generating content. And we've fed it with so much stuff before that it's able to blurt out new things. So if you're looking for it to be creative or come up with things that are completely different, probably not. Now, for you individually, it might, because it's bringing in the perspective of other training data that it's received. And so you might think it's being creative, but it's not. It's somewhere within the human, so it's not going to be making a scientific breakthrough on its own anytime soon. It may only do so to maybe spur an idea out of, a researcher like you that's, on the precipice of something, and then you use this to help speed you up. So I think that, the reasoning capabilities are very basic at best, and I would like to see a bigger focus spent on the upfront. This is one of the fields, right? I kind of look at this previously as a researcher. You'd write a paper, right? And you're also doing the same thing. You write a scientific article, you go to a conference, you present it, you then have meetings, and then 2 years later, maybe this technology makes its way out. As of now, NeurIPS, ICLR, ICML, any of these big conferences come up, a paper is released and it's a product by the time the conference is over, right? So they're moving almost too quickly between the science too. So it's almost like the community hasn't even had time to vet these systems yet. So I would love to set up more like just robust testing. We need to know, I mean, coming back to like the AGI question that you had earlier, I'm not sure like the definition of AGI as I, in my mind, see it, right? And I don't think we agree even on what AGI is. I think two of us will probably not be able to agree on what we mean. In my mind, I don't think AGI is anytime soon. But what I am concerned about is people connecting two things that should really not be connected together, and then that's going to do something bad. It's not AGI, but it's two narrow AIs connected that shouldn't be connected to each other, and then you might find something bad happening.
O sea, el movimiento 37 o la jugada 37, que eventualmente descubre AlphaGo 0, es como una suerte de jugada que no estaba en la hoja de ruta de los jugadores de Go, que es el famoso ejemplo de comportamiento emergente, es decir, el modelo descubre algo que no estaba en el roadmap. Eso, en definitiva, si te interpreto bien, eso existe, pero en el campo real del mundo de las aplicaciones, no todo es una jugada 37 en la que la IA nos va descubriendo cosas y nosotros las podemos llevar al campo. Ese sería un poco lo que me querés decir.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Genial, porque a veces trato de sistematizar tu pensamiento para incluso lograr una especie de empatía intelectual, porque tenemos cosmovisiones diferentes, en definitiva, que es lo que veo mucho con personas, primero, que viven en Norteamérica, y segundo, que se forman en institutos como MIT, en donde a veces me ha pasado de interactuar, no me pasa contigo, que a veces hay que como que amalgamar paradigmas de visión y de tipos de conceptos, es decir, de catálogos de palabras, porque en definitiva no estamos discutiendo, sino que estamos tratando de entender si en esta categoría estamos poniendo algo similar.
Yeah, but I think it is very important, right, that we do have these differences and thoughts and opinions, because if we all agreed, that would be worse. We might miss something, right? It's the same thing. I personally don't see AI as an existential risk, but I am glad that there are people who do.
Perfect.
Because if it was all in my camp, we would absolutely do something stupid, right? Because we're not worried about it, right? We would take it for granted. And so it's good. You have to have sort of both extremes always fighting are always debating, let me put it that way. And so we can follow that path. And so every time we do something, this crowd on the one side says, are you using it properly and carefully? And, is it going to, create the new, Death Star or something like that, right? And then on the other side are the people who are like, oh, AI is completely useless, doesn't do anything at all, and so we want to be somewhere in between those two paths, because that's what I think for humanity, that's what we want to do.
O sea, acabas de hacer una síntesis perfecta entre si se forma la estrella de la muerte, cómo podemos balancear el lado oscuro y el lado luminoso de la fuerza.
Use your aggressive feelings, boy. Let the hate flow through you.
Yes. Yeah.
Vamos antes de pasar a la energía de la IA, vamos al prompting, ¿sí? La famosa nueva habilidad humana que es hablar con las máquinas, de prompt engineer. Nosotros, cuando empezamos a hacerle pruebas a GPT-3, tomamos un set de pruebas que ya existían en la comunidad y las escalamos. Estoy hablando de GPT-3 2020. Conseguimos un usuario de GPT-3. En ese momento tenías que pedirle a OpenAI que te habilite para hacer pruebas. Y vimos que con prompts bastante sofisticados, los resultados eran muy incorrectos, incoherentes, y que los sesgos y las alucinaciones eran muy altas. En 2022 volvimos a someter a esas pruebas cuando salió 3.5 en noviembre de 2022. Ahí vimos que la performance había cambiado muchísimo, ¿sí? Pero el prompting, es decir, la iteración secuencial de un humano con lenguaje natural, tratando de que el modelo lo lleve a una tarea relativamente bien hecha para ese humano en ese contexto, era un esfuerzo, era una iteración de prompting. Había que ser bueno haciendo prompting. Lo que estamos viendo hace un par de meses, 3 o 4 meses, es que esa ecuación se invirtió de manera dramática y que ahora prompts intuitivos, siguiendo a Daniel Kahneman en Think Fast, Think Slow, es prompt fast, prompt slow, y que el prompt intuitivo o rápido, hasta incluso en algunas tareas, logra mejores resultados. Esto al menos es lo que nosotros hemos. Si estás de acuerdo en esto, ¿por qué te parece que es este fenómeno? Porque la IA está mejorando muchísimo la capacidad de anticipación de lo que va a querer ese humano en esa tarea. ¿A qué pensás que se debe este fenómeno? Si es que compartís este fenómeno.
Yeah, so there is no doubt that a prompt that I did 3 years ago and a prompt I do today, the prompt today yields much better results, easier. So I think there's 2 phenomena that have occurred. One is you've continued to interact with this model for 3 years, and so it's learning from you. And it is starting to actually become better at responding to you. I know I have multiple chats open. Let's say in Radium, we have our own chat, or our own LLMs, or even in ChatGPT. It's definitely picking up context from whatever I said a month ago, right? It's picking that up. In fact, sometimes it'll keep giving you the wrong answer that you're trying to get rid of because somewhere up above you had said do it this way, and you might have even forgotten, but it doesn't forget. So that's sort of one. The second is that, so yeah, it's learning from you. And the second is just the models have gotten better, right? They're constantly learning from you. And, I found this really funny. I was reached out to by a reporter just yesterday. I think Sam Altman said a few days ago that people saying please and thank you to OpenAI has costed millions of dollars. So I had done some back of the envelope math on how much energy that extra...
Lo tenía escrito.
Yeah.
Tenía escrito eso de Sam Altman para preguntarte sobre ese punto. Lo tenía justo escrito.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It's absolutely true. Right. So the systems have gotten better at more pre-fill optimization, more better batching, better ability to break the words down into more logical units. The space in which they're now working is much larger. These vectors, where there used to be maybe, a vector space of billions of parameters and now trillions of parameters. So their nuance and capabilities have gotten a lot better.
Pero aprovechando tu conocimiento técnico, ¿vos pensás que mejoran porque distribuyen mejor los componentes dentro del modelo para que haya componentes especializados? A Andrew G. lo vi a veces de ir por este camino.
Yeah.
¿O en realidad es una combinación entre perfilado del usuario, es perfilar tus conversaciones históricas, y eventualmente ir poniendo muchas layers, muchas capas, para que el modelo vaya siendo una especie de filtro con estos modelos razonadores, en donde van poniendo capas de revisión? ¿Vos pensás que es una combinación de ambas cosas o es más que se va distribuyendo para anclarlo en modelos específicos para diferentes tareas?
Yeah, so I think definitely the model architectures themselves have improved. Our context lengths now are thousands of pages worth of text. So they're able to, previously you'd have 16K token context. Now you're talking millions of token context, right? So you're able to now, it's able to remember a lot more than you can remember.
Yes.
Certainly, right? I think that's definitely one aspect of it is, it's I can have a conversation, maybe, I use it to help me write code, for example, and it's able to remember an error that I got 3 weeks ago, right? I don't remember that because it moved on. So it's got, that memory capabilities are definitely a lot better. And definitely the models themselves have improved. These chain of thought, these newer reasoning models like O1 and DeepSeek R1, they're just of higher quality in just the way that they're designed to interact with each other. So there's like an internal conversation going on within the model itself to spit out a better answer. So I think we've gotten both, right? So first, the history, the ability to remember more information has gone up. And then that coupled with the fact that we've come up with these models that are just more sophisticated. I won't call them, reasoning in the traditional sense, but they're definitely more sophisticated in the way that they interact with it.
Ahora entramos en la energía de la IA. Hay un cuento de Jorge Luis Borges. Borges es... Borges es, en mi opinión, como el Messi de la literatura argentina. Digamos, es un ser humano increíble. Muchos filósofos, Michel Foucault, entre otros, empiezan libros diciendo, este cuento nace de este análisis que voy a hacer nace de un cuento de Borges. Y lo mismo, de hecho, algunas personas de Estados Unidos, como Noam Chomsky, que lo cita a Borges para graficar su punto, más allá de que Noam Chomsky es muy crítico por lo que vi, de la lógica de los Transformers y de cómo reproduce el lenguaje. Pero Borges tiene un cuento que te lo voy a enviar, es un cuento breve, que se llama Funes el Memorioso, en donde él decía que había un personaje que se llamaba Cronométrico Irineo Funes, que cuando tú me decías eso se me vino a la cabeza, y era un personaje que no tenía capacidad de olvido. Entonces él decía que cada vez que vivía un momento, como podía recordar todo lo que vivía, era una persona que estaba continuamente recepcionando información y al no poder olvidar, no podía abstraer y no podía generalizar. Ese cuento es brillante. Entonces, acá voy a mi primera pregunta. La simulación de abstracción y generalización que hacen los modelos de IA. En definitiva, como humanos, quizás deberíamos enfocarnos más en la etapa de generalización y abstracción para pensar un problema y no en la parte de contextualización o memorización de todos los aspectos de un problema. Ahí deberíamos agregar valor, o sea, tendríamos que ser lo opuesto a este personaje de Borges.
We should. It's really tough, and no one knows how to do that, right? And so we're really good at memorization. It's like, school systems, right? And I don't know how it is. You'll have to tell me. But various school systems, for the longest time, they would just make you memorize stuff. It's easier to teach that.
Obvio.
It's tougher to teach creativity. It's tougher to teach,
claro.
right? So what would you do in school? They'd ask you the times table, right? 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times, and that's what you'd memorize as a kid. Now you kind of understand logically what that is. Same thing with English. I learned English grammar memorizing rules, and, it was the most boring way of doing things, and it was certainly not of any true, it didn't help you. And over time, when you got more creative. So I think it's just we don't know how to do it. Or if we had a data set that would be able to, we could improve teaching, right? It's the only way, unfortunately, is to almost do it by practice. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have. I agree with you, right? I would love to create a system that can abstract, because in theory, that would start to actually become like the human brain, right? Talking about AI and energy. I mean, these systems are using hundreds of gigawatt hours or terawatt hours to operate versus to do what our brain does on a day-to-day basis at a fraction of the, right? And I know it's a very, I'm being a little bit flippant with the, with that analogy. But it is true. Our brain can do a lot at a much smaller energy thing. And so we're not actually simulating, right? We're just doing more rote learning, which is how our education system also is largely built across the world.
Obvio.
So I don't know how it is. How is it in Argentina? Do you guys, do you folks have a separate education system?
Yo creo que cuando nosotros pensamos la educación tradicional, me parece que nos quedamos en una era pre-IA y ya éramos obsoletos antes de la IA. O sea, la obsolescencia educativa ni siquiera se ayornó con las plataformas y las redes sociales. Con lo cual, el desafío que tenemos ahora es como un gran cañón del Colorado entre un profesor o un alumno que está tratando de interactuar con ChatGPT o Gemini y un profesor tratando de enseñarle a memorizar o a hacer un razonamiento inductivo, cuando en realidad quizás tendría que focalizarse en la experiencia, la sintiencia y la abstracción y la generalización, que son dos cosas en donde la IA puede hacerlo de manera simulada, pero en definitiva, al menos por ahora, como humanos, podemos agregar valor desde ese lugar. Me parece que en Latinoamérica, por supuesto, en mi humilde opinión, tenemos una brecha de entre 50 y 100 años. O sea, para hacer ese upgrade de cuál sería el rol de un profesor con esta tecnología. Es como que tenemos que reinventarnos. Esta es una opinión, por supuesto, ¿no?
Yeah, and so it's sort of the same answer for how do we get AIs to abstract themselves. I don't know if we're, right, you look at a child and how they learn, right? You don't need to tell them that this is, it has to be four legs and for a table to be oriented.
1 million of cats. 1 million of cats to learn how to recognize a cat.
You don't need to do anything. You need to show them one time.
Yes.
And
it's one shot learning.
You can take the cat, you can turn it upside down, you can put it like this, you can have it stand up and they know cat, right? And so to reproduce that, I'm not sure how we, and I think people are thinking about, maybe if we make the model more efficient, we can start to play around with dumping more data at it to figure it out, maybe learn some of that. But that's just, I don't think we've come up with that. It's just somewhat wishful thinking. And again, in my humble opinion, and I'm sure there are people that'll disagree with me on that.
Claro, pero si yo quisiese, supongamos que yo soy el abogado de una IA. Voy a ponerme ese traje. I'm a lawyer from una IA. Mi argumento sería, ok, los humanos tienen como mínimo 100.000, 200.000 años de evolución, al menos este tipo de humanos. Y ustedes ahora pueden hacer este nivel de abstracción y generalización después de miles de años de evolución. Resulta que esta tecnología en 70, 80 años ya llegó a este lugar que nos hace pensar que en 10, 20, 30 no va a llegar a algo parecido a lo que nosotros alabamos de los humanos. Esa es la parte que me parece que yo veo que en la industria y en las personas que están metidas en este tema, esa es la parte en donde yo noto como esa incertidumbre y temor. Porque es como decir, entiendo que la IA no hace lo que hacemos nosotros, pero si en 70 años hace todo esto, ¿qué va a pasar en los próximos 10? Esto es lo que a mí me pasa también a veces cuando leo papers.
And I think that's the big one, right? Based on the way that we're structured today, the jobs that we have, the way we do things, it turns out a lot of what we do is based on what you memorized. And again, not to in any way undermine fields, right? But even as a scientist, a doctor, a lawyer, right? A lot of it is your ability to have absorbed knowledge and then apply it. And so I think those kind of positions, right? Even for me as a scientist, like I am essentially paid to read a lot of stuff and then mix and, kind of do a shake in my head and then pop out with something new. So I think those kind of things are going to change. It's almost like before the calculator and after the calculator, right? Except obviously on a bunch of different things at the same time now. But before a calculator, you were tested on whether you could do, 5 times 5 numbers, right? 1 million, if you could do, oh, wow, that's amazing. Now you just use a calculator, right, to answer the same question. And so I think it's going to be the same with AI. We need to rethink, right, at a fundamental level. Okay, AI is good at taking, all of these books you have behind you, all of these, movies, and condensing that information into a nice format that's easy to read. So if that's what your entire day's work is, maybe that's not a value that we need in the future. It was until now, but maybe in the future it's not something. So we have to change. I still believe that humans are unique and capable of doing many things that the AI cannot do, at least from my viewpoint, in the next 20 years, 30 years. I don't know, maybe we can brute force some stuff future, but just emotion and those kind of things, they don't exist in the systems yet.
Atrás tuyo está Iron Man, ¿sí? Iron Man, un big Iron Man.
Yeah, that's my costume normally. That's how I go around.
Yes, te lo sacaste y lo dejaste ahí.
That was a secret.
Exactamente. Tú te lo sacaste, lo dejaste ahí. Apenas entrar, le contamos a la gente que mira el podcast que vos viniste en ese traje y que lo dejaste ahí.
Yeah.
Lo estacionaste.
Indian Iron Man.
Vamos a la energía de la IA, ¿sí? Viendo una de tus charlas, no era una charla TED, vos diste una charla TED, me resonó una frase que la anoté y la voy a leer textual, porque además me dio mucha gracia. Cada vez que le hacemos una pregunta a ChatGPT, algo en la selva tropical muere. Yo inmediatamente me imaginé un árbol incendiándose o cayendo de la selva, y obviamente esto me llevó a cómo como usuarios de estas tecnologías nos desconectamos de las consecuencias que genera el uso de esta tecnología. ¿Querés contarnos, porque hay mucha gente que está totalmente desconectada de esto, querés contarnos cómo haces ese link entre, por supuesto no es literal, pero entre lo que puede significar un prompt en ChatGPT?
Yeah, so I love to share this little anecdote. I have a son, he's learning to read, and I got so tired of reading the books we have at home. So I made an iPad app. He can input a prompt or even talk to it, something like, tell me about a little blue truck, and it'll actually make a story about that. And so we did this, sort of a joint project that we both did. It's an iPad app. It's out. I removed it from the App Store, but it's there. You can run it on your iPad. And it creates these stories. It makes a little figure, right? And then writes a nice little story about whatever topic he wants. And he's had something like goats eating Nutella, right? So, stuff that my imagination would never give me. We did an analysis. Every time he pressed the button, it was as much energy as the entire iPad. But the iPad's battery didn't go down. Somewhere in the cloud, that much energy was being used by a computer. And in fact, it emitted about 5 grams of carbon dioxide every time. So it was like driving your internal combustion car like 4 or 5 miles. And so that's the real danger with Gen AI. It is hidden. You don't see the effects of it. I was looking at, data centers in just in Argentina. And, the biggest growth is going to be in AI most likely. Currently, as of today, data centers in Argentina are probably about 2.5 to 3%. Correct me if any of these stats seem out of view. This is based on what I could find public knowledge. It's about 3% of the country's 3%. It's about 200,000 Argentinians' energy use is just in data centers today. And that number is going up to at a rate of about 10% annually for the next few years. So within, about 5 or 6 years, about almost, 7 to 10% of the Argentinian energy, of your energy, right? So the equivalent of, in fact, I was looking at it, I think the total data center energy is roughly equivalent to Nunquin's, like the people's energy utilization. So it's a lot. And every time you interact with these, you're doing things like, somewhere in the rainforest, someone is dying, right? Or some poor child somewhere is not getting, is living in a polluted area. Or water. The analysis I did is the AI systems in Argentina are probably using about 500 million, so about like 500 million liters of water a year to power these data centers, which is staggering amounts of, just to think about it. Every time you have a conversation with ChatGPT, throw a bottle of water in the trash. Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Of clean water. That's how much water it's using. So if you're in areas of the world where water scarcity is a problem, which is in many parts of this world, that's where it's going. And again, I don't want to say it's all bad, right? AI has got some amazing opportunities, but we're using it so inefficiently. It's like we're driving a V12 car where a V6 or a V4 or maybe a hybrid electric could have done the job. You could have gotten the same distance, been there fast enough, but you could have done it more efficiently. And no one's thought about it. They're like, oh, you know what? Just add another 2 cylinders onto this engine and let's see what happens.
El poder del lado oscuro se paga en kilovatios.
Yes, kilowatt hours.
Yes, sí. Esa frase que la generé con ChatGPT representa un paper tuyo. ¿Cómo podrías hacer como el storytelling de esa frase?
Yeah. So, could you repeat that? I didn't see.
El poder del lado oscuro se paga en kilovatios y es del paper From Words to Watts.
Words to Watts, yeah.
O sea, el cómputo, el costo energético, por un lado está para entrenar las IAs. Y por otro lado, una vez que están entrenadas, lo que se llama inferencia. Es decir, le pido que haga esta consulta y que analice sus parámetros y me diga.
Yep.
¿A vos te parece que el problema de este desperdicio o de esta lógica de está más en la inferencia o en el entrenamiento?
It's in the inference.
Okay.
And so there are like 3 phases of AI. First is the model development. This is where you're often like collecting a lot of the data. Then you have the actual training, which is where you hear these crazy stories in the news. And then the one you don't hear about is inference. And that's the killer. In fact, when we talk to, and some of this is anecdotal because no one wants to publish this information, 70% to maybe even 90% of the total life cycle cost of a model comes just from inference, especially for some of the large companies. And you don't even know about the training. And so one thing that, we've been trying to promote across the industry is transparency. Just tell them how much the damn model used, right? Let us know. I have more transparency when I book a flight ticket today because I get a carbon, if I'm going from Boston to San Francisco or to Argentina, it tells me how many kilograms of carbon dioxide. Why can't we do the same thing for AI models, right? Like, we have the data.
Entonces, ¿vos pensás que la disrupción de DeepSeek tiene que ver con haber optimizado la parte de la inferencia? ¿A vos te parece que por eso DeepSeek produjo un colapso en el modelo de negocio subyacente a entrenar un modelo de IA?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Having a company in the AI business It has not caused the collapse. So I don't know what happened to NVIDIA's stock. I think there was some other thing going on.
Colapso por the market, en la bolsa, no,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
no un colapso en el mundo real.
Sí. So what DeepSeek did well is when people had been building V12s and, V14s and V16, sized engines, DeepSeek came in and said, no, if I make the cylinder, like this, right, more of a V rather than straight up, it's actually a little bit more efficient. I get more gas mileage out of it. Now, they didn't change the structure in any significant way. And in fact, even to run DeepSeek R1, you still need to use 8 or 16 GPUs, again, depending on what size, what version you're using, quantization, non-quant. So it's not small. It's smaller than OpenAI. And in fact, we've seen benchmarks where people have compared DeepSeek's performance, right, which is a reasoning model, right, that follow this chain of thought, sort of model or technique, comparing that against more traditional, your Llama 70Bs, and they're almost double the energy cost. So they're still pretty expensive. They're better than OpenAI O1 or, any O3 or any of those models that are out there, but it's still quite expensive from an energy perspective.
Perfecto.
But what they did do was they
Desde la perspectiva energética, pero no desde la perspectiva de cuánto sale cada token.
Yes. So the reason that they are able to cut the token cost is because now you've opened up competition.
Okay.
Previously,
Perfect.
these models were only held in private by, entities that could kind of charge you whatever you wanted or whatever they wanted.
Claro.
And now what they've done is they've opened it up to companies like mine that can now provide it, and we're going to get competitive, right? We are going to know exactly what our costs are, and our business is selling compute. And so we know what margins, and we can do it at a much better price than maybe what, OpenAI is trying to recoup both their R&D investment as well as their, as well as the actual computing cost that goes into it, which is, non-trivial. We get to just focus on, well, we don't need to do the R&D part because somebody else has done that for us because it's open source. We just get to focus on delivering it cheap to people. And so that's what caused the collapse in the cost. But the usage has gone up because now more people are trying it out.
Datos. Nosotros solemos decir que nadie sabe los datos que hay en Internet. Nadie puede saber todo lo que se publicó en Internet. Creo que es imposible que alguien tenga el conocimiento acabado de todo lo que existe públicamente en Internet y lo que no existe públicamente en Internet. Con lo cual tenemos un problema inicial para entender cómo se entrenan los modelos, que es como una incertidumbre de base, de nacimiento, que es no tenemos idea de qué tipo de datos están ahí. Sabemos que hay datasets curados, etiquetados, que por supuesto ustedes han usado y mucha gente usa, pero a su vez, por otra parte, la forma en la que se pesan los tokens tampoco es muy transparente. Entonces, tenemos como un doble problema de transparencia. Por un lado, qué tipo de datos, y por el otro lado, cómo se hacen los pesos en la inferencia. Pero a su vez, y por último, y ahora te hago la pregunta, tenemos un problema adicional que es, muchos afirman que se están quedando sin datos para entrenar. Yo disiento un poco de esa afirmación. Me parece que estamos generando muchísimos datos, entonces no estoy viendo que tengamos un problema de que nos estamos quedando sin datos, pero los datos sintéticos están empezando a ser protagonistas. Es decir, generar datos falsos. ¿Cómo ves vos el problema de explicarle a los clientes o a una organización que te pide transparencia con todos estos problemas de opacidad, de cajas negras que hay en el camino de un ciclo de una IA o de un entrenamiento de modelo?
Yeah, so I think it's actually kind of interesting. Companies that used to be, right, we're seeing pharmaceutical companies, some of the most conservative companies out there are willing to deal with this opaqueness or lack of transparency because no one wants to fall behind. So I think a lot of people are jumping into using the technology just because they don't want to be left behind at this point. But that doesn't mean that the transparency isn't a very big problem. We're doing our best as, let's say, a company or even as a research group to add as much transparency as we can around the boxes, but some of the pieces are still very much black boxes, right? Talking about the data that's being collected, I agree with you. I don't think we're running out of data. We're running out of public data.
Okay.
And behind firewalls, in enterprises, in your SharePoints and your OneDrives, there is a ton of data still out there that has not been trained yet or trained on yet, hopefully. Right? I think some companies are finding out that maybe it has been trained on stuff that you didn't think was out there. On the model side, I'd say the biggest challenges are also, we don't know how those answers came up, right? It's just telling you an answer, and there's no reasoning on how and why and what. So if you're using it in any very serious application, you're a lawyer, and if you have a legal case and you're using this, presumably you need to know why it gave you that answer. You can't just go to the court and be like, well, here's what it is. The judge is going to ask you, based on what rules and what statutes and what articles are you coming up with this opinion, or are you making this claim? So it's the same thing, in terms of people have just sort of given up, right? It's like privacy. I'll put myself. I was crazy about privacy 5-6 years ago, and I've just given up. Right, as in I still try to do some best practices. It's like the you've heard the story, like two people are in the forest, two friends are in the forest, and then they see a lion. And the lion starts chasing them, and they're both running, and they're like, "Why are you running? The lion's faster than us." Like, I don't need to be faster than the lion. I need to be faster than you. So it's sort of the same thing in privacy.
Para que se lo coma él.
Yeah, exactly. I just need to be better than the average to make me tougher, but we've given up. My phone has got every app that I can think of at this point, talking to things across the world. And so it's the same thing, I think, even on the transparency side. People started to say they wanted transparency with these models. And that was the hottest research field like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Explainability, explainable machine learning, explainable AI. What happened to that work, right? It still exists. Again, I'm not trying to diminish the community, but these models are so complex that we're just like,
okay,
I don't know.
Y precisamente como eso nos lleva a un dilema, porque como tú dices, en un punto, como es tan invasivo el paradigma de perfilado, es decir, ya la privacidad adquiere otra dimensión, entonces ya la privacidad no es lo que era hace 30 años, con lo cual ahora también la transparencia no es lo que se pedía hace 25 años. Y acá viene un punto muy importante para entrar al final de este podcast, que es, hace poco salió un paper que hablaba de que cuando el modelo explica, de Anthropic, cuando el modelo explica lo que hace, en realidad no es lo que hace. Es una simulación de razonamiento y el humano se queda contento porque el modelo le dice toda una secuencia, que son los modelos que razonan, que explicitan, pero que ese razonamiento y esa explicación no es lo que efectivamente el modelo hace. Es una puesta en escena de lo que supuestamente hace, que además va con una narrativa de lo que un humano tendría que hacer. Con esto te llevo al punto que acabas de decir. Retomo la anécdota del león y de las dos personas en el bosque. Con lo cual, probablemente, en un punto sea, no me interesa si es la explicación, esta explicación me basta, que me da el modelo, y con esta me voy a quedar. Entonces es como algo parecido a lo que nos pasa con la privacidad. ¿Coincidís con que podríamos ir a ese punto?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not, and obviously I'm also familiar with this, have you ever used like cursor, the coding? Have you ever made a mistake and tried to hit undo on that? It doesn't undo because it's every time generating. It doesn't actually save, right? And it took me one very big screw up to figure that out, to be reminded of that, right? Because these systems are we're so integrated with them. It's the same thing, I think, coming back to your, example of the reasoning that the model gives. It's for lack of a better term, you can beep this out, but it's bullshit, right? That it's making up along the way.
Es otra predicción de tokens.
Exactly. That's all it is. It's more tokens that's being created in the style of explaining what it's doing. And you have no way to verify this, right? And I think it's just a checkbox that people do and move on. And, I hope there isn't something too serious that makes us have to rethink whether we're okay with that balance or not, right? As of now, luckily, it's still been applied to largely things where you might lose a few dollars, no human lives yet, but I'm worried that, medical decisions may be made based on this, and then we're really in trouble. And then we might have to walk back and figure out, okay, no, we really need that transparency in how the model is operating. Right now, I think there just hasn't been a market demand for it yet.
No quiero ponerme muy filosófico, pero un amigo mío, profesor, una persona muy inteligente, un día me dijo, frente a esta misma discusión, otra profesora de IA que dirige un laboratorio de IA que se llama Laura, Daniel y Laura, ambos, Daniel Pastor y Laura Díaz, un día me decían, Juan, ¿por qué se preocupan tanto por las cajas negras si los humanos toman decisiones en un montón de aspectos con cajas negras? Y de hecho, el juicio por jurados, cuando un jurado dice culpable o inocente, muchas veces tomaron la decisión y van a simular una explicación, pero no va a ser quizás las razones, comillas, verdaderas por las cuales tomaron la decisión. Entonces, esto nos lleva a un punto ya de esta última parte de la charla, que es: las máquinas no tienen propósito, y las máquinas en principio no tienen la necesidad de ser transparentes porque las máquinas son silicio, carbono, chips, modelos, cadenas de if, lenguajes de programación, librerías, Python, etcétera, etcétera. Pero pareciera ser que poco a poco vamos a aceptar cosas que ya aceptamos en los humanos, como por ejemplo que un humano me diga que no y que el sistema valide que no me lo justifique muy bien. Pareciera ser que las cajas negras en la IA, aunque a nosotros nos den miedo, van a empezar a aparecer y quizás hasta no tengamos la chance de que nos lo expliquen, pero igual lo vamos a aceptar por una cuestión de eficiencia, de resultados. ¿Vos creés que vamos hacia eso?
I think we're already there. I don't even think we're heading in that direction. I think we're there. So there's sort of been two approaches that people have figured out on the safety and transparency. One is obviously to interrogate, to get into the model itself and figure out what is happening. The other is to make sure that that black box, has got very defined input and output bounds. And that looks like where we're headed to today, right? We're trying to figure out what's happening in the model is very difficult to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to instead put a big, box around the box, on the box, right? That's a strict perimeter that tells you what inputs and what outputs. If you look like Llama Guard, that's what they're doing, right? Rather, they're saying, you know what, this is too complicated for us to figure out what it's actually doing.
Input and output.
Exactly. What we're going to do is just make sure that it doesn't give you something bad on the output, right? So if you're using it in language, that it's not going to spit out bad language or something that's very divisive or, very negative. So they'll put the bounds on that. That's a little bit easier to control because then it's sort of what are our societal norms? Same thing with image generation. Okay, if it's something depicting violence, I'm not going to input it. So I can make sure that if somebody asks me for instructions on how to make a bomb, I will say I cannot do that, right? People can still break it. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit solvable compared to the trying to figure out what's happening in the model these days, which has become incredibly tough. I think there's some people who are, without changing the middle architecture itself, it's going to be tough to undo that.
Me acuerdo de un paper de Unlearning en donde el experimento era con los libros de Harry Potter. Entonces le enseñaban al modelo de que cuando reconozca un texto no logre responderte con los personajes de Harry Potter porque se los había desaprendido el modelo. ¿A vos te parece que el Unlearning va a ser importante en un montón de industrias para tratar de evitar que el modelo recuerde eso y de esa manera lograr cierto resultado que ya no es prevenir un jailbreak o prevenir una contaminación de datos, sino es que el modelo no aprenda eso? ¿Te parece que eso es una buena forma de aproximarse a estos fenómenos?
Yeah, I think we're at least from our viewpoint, we're seeing like a couple. One is that, the second is sort of guards, and the third is fine tuning, right? So essentially changing the model itself but focusing it on your data. That tends to also have some pretty good results quite fast, especially if you have the data structured in the right way. You can get it to building this sort of fine-tuned or bespoke model relatively easily. So that's what we're seeing, I think, most people kind of moving towards.
Para terminar, primero, genial la conversación, me encantó.
And
podcast,
you didn't give me more tea in between.
No, because
you didn't offer it again.
Tú me tenías que pedir, porque yo no quiero torturarte dándote mate. Recuerda que el mate es una bebida, es like...
acquired tea.
Una caja gris es el mate. Es una caja gris. No llega a ser negra, pero tampoco es muy blanca. No es un té. No es un café que uno lo recibe. Si quieres más, no tengo problema, te doy más. No te quiero invadir con el mate. Este podcast que se llama Futuro Pasado, como una paradoja en que para algunas personas el futuro está viniendo, para otras el futuro es pasado, y para otras no sé qué va a pasar en el futuro, y trato de entender lo mejor que pueda el presente. Es decir, estamos viviendo una época, más allá de personas como tú que lideran campos de investigación, muchas personas en un montón de empresas y organizaciones, nosotros notamos incertidumbre. Por lo menos yo en Latinoamérica veo bastante incertidumbre sobre qué es lo que va a pasar con la IA. Entonces, el propósito humano, lo que los japoneses llaman ikigai, que es un concepto oriental, que tiene que ver con encontrar una razón de ser para vivir. Lo hablaba con Enzo en el episodio que vamos a tener con Enzo, esto de cómo podemos encontrar razón de ser frente a máquinas o a sistemas de IA que cada vez logran simular mejor lo que hace un humano. ¿Cuál es tu razón de ser? Si yo te tuviese que preguntar por qué te levantás a la mañana, escribís papers, cofundás una empresa, ahora estás confundando otra, ¿cuál es tu razón de ser en esta lógica, en esta forma de encontrar propósito? Es decir, porque muchas personas lo intentan. ¿Cómo vos buscas propósito en tu vida?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what is the most exciting part of this field right now is just the pace of innovation, the ability to see new things happening. And it's humbling for me as a researcher to be involved with this and be able to participate and, have these type of conversations. One thing that this technology has done is democratized innovation, right? Not that DeepSeek was tiny, but they were a relatively small entity coming from China compared to maybe some of the well-known players, and the way that they were able to get into the market. We're seeing same thing happening in Europe, hopefully more in Latin America as well. This has become, worldwide. Really all you need is a laptop and access to some computer to start making innovation. This isn't true of, 20 years ago, where in order to make innovation, you needed a large laboratory, or even to do science, you needed a large laboratory. Now everything is connected. So for me, the excitement is being able to keep learning, keep at the forefront of innovation. But more importantly, I feel it's humbling, and especially on the environmental side, somewhat of a responsibility that people who are involved in this field be able to really kind of push it through, whether it's through commercializing new technology, but kind of go beyond just the research and be able to actually do it. But yeah, it's more than anything, it's just a lot of fun. It's great to be involved with this.
Vijay, esta es una remera del podcast. Ahí tienes el DeLorean.
Wow.
Para que cuando te vayas a Boston, no sé si te la vas a poner, pero al menos la puedes regalar a algunos de tus equipos, o para que recuerdes que tenemos que estamos transitando en un mundo en donde Black Mirror ya dejó de ser ficción.
Not at all, and that is the scariest thing. I mean, I stopped watching Black Mirror because it got too real.
I read the paper.
Yeah, it's too real and too scary now. Yeah, no, I know.
Gracias por estar y gracias por estar en Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Pleasure to be here.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias.